Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Georgina Nelson, founder and CEO of TruRating. And today's discussion is going to be a candid one about where customer experience stands right now and where it needs to go. Because let's face it, dashboards alone just don't drive change, and sentiment scores are not getting anyone a seat at the strategy table. In too many boardrooms, customer experience still gets viewed as soft. It's the team with the insights, but not the influence, and the team with the data, but not the budget. And in 2025, that's just not sustainable. So we're here today to flip that script because customer experience teams need that win. They need to get that buy-in, the budget, and actually shape the strategy. And we're not just talking about voice of customer anymore. They're showing up how experience drives operational performance. They're helping their brands act faster, execute better, and tie frontline behavior to business outcomes that really matter: conversion, spend, and loyalty. And this isn't just a nice to have shift, it's really a necessity. And I'm thrilled to be joined by someone who's helped some of the world's most ambitious brands make that leap, and who's been a huge part of helping us shape the work which we do at TruRating. Zack Hamilton is former Chief Experience Officer and Strategic Advisor to more than 200 global brands. He's been in those boardrooms, he's been on those operation calls, and most recently, he's been deep in the data, working with us at TruRating to analyze over 1 billion pieces of customer ratings captured at the point of payment. So if you've ever felt the frustration of delivering great insight that no one acted on, or watching a pilot stall because that execution fell flat, today's conversation is for you. So, Zach, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, George, thanks for having me. Looking forward to jumping in with you and really flipping the script, as you said in your opening. I love a spicy conversation. I think you know me, I won't hold back. But I think you couldn't have said it any better. I think ultimately the system that drives um, kind of the customer centric mindset that all of the executives talk about, but don't necessarily understand how to really activate within their organizations, is broken.
Mm,
And that's how we really help them activate the insights. And if you really think about it, CX has a much bigger role to play in all of our retailers than what most people actually realize.
completely. Customer is king. And clearly, customer experience as a team and department should be the ones leading the charge. And as you say, I've heard you say many times, it's not customer experience which is broken, it's the systems. But like help our listeners really understand what you mean by that, and can you paint some examples?
Yeah, I'll give an example. Just when I first started, I spent 15 years in retail. And if you look at my career, I started as a store manager, and then worked my way up to a multi-unit leader where I had about 10 stores, and then VP of store operations where I had 150 stores before I joined Aaron's in the corporate office there in Atlanta. And ultimately, a lot of CX practitioners, what we've been taught is if you just democratize insights, everyone will know how to take action on them. And that couldn't be further from the truth, especially in retail, right? You may have
Mm,
your large retail locations that have higher volume. They might be getting on average 15 or 20 pieces of survey feedback a month. But if you look at the percentage of their transactions, it's really, really, really low. And so, as operators, if you think about the different levers that we have to pull every single day in order to drive, profitability, if we look at
mm,
just profitability per square foot, if we think about, how do we manage our talent, how do we manage all of our products and goods that are inside of our stores, um, we can no longer just act on our gut. We have to really leverage data to help us make these decisions, especially in live time when customers are moving faster than what we've ever seen, right? Consumer behaviors are significantly changed. And so when I think about kind of that broken system, I think some of that broken system is just um, one, it's the lack of valuable insights per store. So, yes, a lot of CX strategies have great kind of brand sentiment. They have kind of journey level data. But when it comes to my store and knowing what I need to fix shift to shift as a store manager when I have new employees coming in on a changeover, or what do I specifically coach to, I'm really flying blind. And so
Mm,
ultimately, that's the performance system within our stores. Um, that right now is just operating off of gut.
yeah. And I guess from the CX professionals' point of views, obviously that's the operator mindset from the CX leaders. You're saying maybe have these brand metrics which they go on. You know, do you mean things like NPS? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So brands, yeah. So MPS, CSAT, even OSAT, right? Operational
Mm,
satisfaction. Like we have all these great metrics. And I think traditional experience management was set up really just to manage the metrics. But very, very few organizations know how to take action on the data. And so ultimately, from an operational point of view, if I have out of stocks, yes, I might get a couple pieces of feedback on, hey, this particular item was out of stock, but I don't know, well, how does that convert, how does that translate into my store conversion? How does that translate into, my average transaction value? What does that matter for, time to repeat purchase? So
mm,
as a store manager, I got compensated on my quarterly profit. So I was always looking at data to say, how can I improve right now in lifetime? What's the data that I can get? Ultimately, yes, we had customer feedback surveys that ran post transaction, but even if that went 3 or 5 days after post transaction, we may not get that feedback for 5 to 7 days, depending on when the customer did respond to it. Well, in 5 to 7 days, that's stale in operations.
yeah.
I need data today to be able to manage what's happening within my four walls today.
Yeah, it's just not timely. We often hear that the customer insight teams are the last to know where
Right.
there's been a problem, because they're just relying on that squeaky wheel, that complainer via avenues which aren't timely. But I know you've called them vanity metrics before. What do they have a role in customer experience of the future? That traditional voice of customer player. What's your view?
Um, I'm pretty spicy on this. Matter of fact, when I started leading customer experience at Aaron's, we were actually one of the first retailers to drop Net Promoter Score,
Mm.
and that was almost 12 years ago. Ultimately, NPS is an advocacy metric. It's very hard to track um, if someone did refer you, a friend or family member. Ultimately, if you think about retail, customer lifetime value is king. If you really think about ultimately what you're trying to achieve. And so for me, behavioral metrics are what's most important. As a customer, it's easy for me to say I would do something, but did I actually do it? Did I come back? Did I buy more? Did I increase, the number of purchases in a year? So when you really think about what are the metrics of the future for customer experience in retail, it's customer lifetime value. How often are your customers shopping and how much are they buying from you? That's what
Mm,
really matters.
interesting. And so, do you think if CX teams, do you think that's a step change which needed from CX teams that if they adopted this new value and tied it to business metrics, they'd get that seat at the table? I know much of your passion is trying to elevate the voice of CX professionals within businesses. What's the advice you'd give on that roadmap?
Yeah, I don't think it's just a CX shift. I think it's an organizational shift, right? Because too often when retailers calculate their customer lifetime value, it's typically much lower than what they want it to be. And so no one inside the organization then can align on, well, what's the time period we want to look at customer lifetime value over?
Mm,
And so ultimately, I think there's a shift that needs to happen internally. And I'll give you an example why. Recently, I had a conversation with a CEO of a department store, and his feedback to me was, look, our NPS is an 84. It looks really, really great. And my feedback to him was, that's great, but I was also just on your earnings call. And what you presented out was your customer files down over 100,000 customers year over year. Your first time buyers to your website haven't made a repeat purchase. So 84% of your first time buyers. So your customer acquisition cost is ridiculous. And your average transaction value has declined as well. So if your NPS is really 84, then why are some of those lead metrics not better?
Mm, yeah, yeah, totally.
And so ultimately, I think the shift that organizations need to be making is looking at the behavioral data, linking that directly to financial data, and making decisions based on that, right? So if you think about customer lifetime value, what's time to repeat purchase? What are those specific frictions that are causing the customer not to repurchase quicker? Looking at things like out of stock. If you think about the billion, dollar ratings, that one of the two key drivers was just, could I find what I was looking for? And if not, can I find help to help me locate what it is? Those two key drivers were so important to average transaction value. And so ultimately, as retails continue to look at, well, how do we increase EBITDA or profitability? You should be thinking about what's happening inside my four walls, what's the behavior of the customer, what's the financial output, and let's start making decisions in live time with data to drive those specific positive behaviors that we want to drive.
And I guess this is all the foundations of your retail performance layer, which you think is missing in so much of retail today. Gonna dive into that a bit more, Zach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ultimately, if every retailer on the line right now, we know it's all about performance. We are metriced off of our P&L. And so the things that they're going to look at just on our individual store P&Ls essentially what's our revenue, what's our trending same store sales revenue, um, kind of what's anything that could impact margin. So think about like shrinkage, um, you know, and then ultimately, it's what's the profitability of each store location. And so when you think about brands who are running 800 plus locations, well, ultimately, they have to make decisions at a brand level, but they have to be able to operate at that individual store level. And so, what I think has really been missing, if you go back and listen to the top 100 retailers globally for the last 4 or 5 years, if you just listen to their earnings calls, every single one of them, all for a year for each brand, have one thing in common.
Tell me,
And the
what is
CEO,
it?
she says, or he says, we have to execute the basics. It's all
Mm,
about executing the basics. And so, what are those fundamental basics? Well, do we offer the merchandise that and the products that our customers want? Do we meet or exceed their expectations when they come into the store? So can they find what they're looking for? Can they locate help if they need it? Do they have a great, a good, just even a good experience in store? Is it clean,
mm.
is it safe? Do I have a way to try on? Do I have the opportunity to buy online, pick up in store? Can I return just in store? So if you really think about those basics, what traditional experience management is telling us is what does the data tell us at the high level of the journey? But what's always been missing is what's happening in the moment. And so it's been so difficult to really understand what's happening in the moment because the customer survey has always been the pinnacle of how we engage with customers. And most brands engage with their customers 3, 5, 7 days after purchase. And
Mm.
that feedback is great from a brand level, but it's stale at the performance level. And so when you think about retail performance, it's how do you close the gap? And so what I love the most about TruRating is it is that in the moment data that I need hour by hour or shift by shift to where I can notice if there's out of stocks and we can replenish. I can, coach in the moment. If an employee is having a bad day and it's starting to show up, and we're starting to see that data come through, I can start to look at, hey, what are my busiest times throughout my day? And when I have the most, most traffic where it's driving transaction value, making sure that I'm shifting correctly with my employee schedules. And so ultimately, when you think about what I love about TruRating and capturing that in the moment performance feedback, it is the missing golden nugget that no other traditional experience management company has ever been able to capture.
And yeah, that's all fantastic. And obviously, I'm a huge proponent of that. But for those retailers out there who aren't lucky enough at the moment to have true rating, what would you advise them to do other than obviously reach out to us? But on a serious note, what are the steps which customer experience insight teams can begin to take on this journey, do you think?
Yeah, I think some of the initial steps is really just thinking about, you know, one, just what are your customer expectations when they come into your store? And so, does your customer engagement model or your sales effectiveness model, does it align to customer expectations? So, what I mean by that is, when I was at Aaron's, we were a 50 to 55-year-old organization. And that customer engagement model, when a customer first walked in the store, well, that was written like 20 years ago. It was
Mm,
still needed updated, right? Consumer behavior had shifted. And so ultimately we had to leverage our data, our customer data and insights around what are those new expectations that when our customers walked into our store, what did they expect from us? And so ultimately, we rebuilt the entire sales effectiveness model around those customer expectations. And so that's the first thing I would do as a retailer. Do you have the right customer engagement model?
yeah. And I
You,
and I know I guess the second phase I imagine would be about the coaching,
yeah,
because I know you're such a huge proponent of that. It's not about, you know, thinking that you've provided everyone access to a dashboard and yeah, and job done.
or it's even LMS, right? So even at my time when I had my own store employees, yes, we had our LMS onboarding training videos. But let's be honest, how many of us have ever been chosen a job because they had incredible LMS videos, right? And typically those LMS videos are outdated. And so ultimately, just because I am watching the LMS and I'm looking at customer engagement model, that's not skill transfer, right? That's knowledge, it's not skill transfer. And so, especially for a new employee who's onboarding, you need in the moment data to say, hey, look, here's how Zach engaged George when she walked into the store. Here's what George's feedback. Now, can I coach Zach in the moment? Hey,
Mm,
Zach, you did a really great job of answering George's questions. What I did notice is you didn't make a recommendation. So let's go through a role play around how would you make a recommendation to George based on the questions that she had? One, that instills trust into the decision that George is making because now I'm a trusted advisor. And so ultimately, it's really, if you think about it, it's execute the engagement model, it's observe, and then it's coach. It's a very simple kind of model that store managers or even just shift managers should be doing every single day. And ultimately, it doesn't just have an impact on the customer experience and store conversion and average transaction value, but it also has a significant impact on employee engagement.
mm,
Right? If you look at all these employee engagement studies, 90-day turnover is because maybe they went through LMS, but it didn't apply to their skills. They might be doing multiple different roles. They haven't spend enough time with their shift manager or their store manager. So it's not even about pay, it's about the entire onboarding process. And so bad habits can be developed in the first 90 days when you're engaging with a customer inadvertently because you don't know if you're performing well or not.
And to close that loop, I guess it all gets back to measurement again, measuring the effectiveness of that training, and together being able to see that uptick on those key metrics, those revenue, loyalty, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know this is a sidebar, but if you think about, in retail, basically the two number one and number two teams that get cut is customer experience and L&D, learning and development. And the reason why
Mm,
is they have a really hard time, you know, saying here's the ROI or the return on experience or the return on training and development. Well, now to your point, if you have this live performance layer and you're getting feedback in live time, you can directly link the impact of how well are skills being adopted. Is there another kind of training loop that needs to be implemented? Do our store managers know how to coach effectively? Right? Or is there a training cycle that needs to happen there? I mean, I think the other piece too, George, is, when I had 150 stores, we had what we called bottom stores or bottom stores. And so ultimately I had on average about 15 to 20 stores that weren't profitable. And so
mm.
ultimately it was, well, what are the local action plans happening in those specific stores? And it was really hard to build action plans when a lot of these stores were in smaller communities where we really didn't get much feedback at all. If I had TruRating and I was getting, feedback at the point of transaction, thinking about monthly payments or even just leasing, the coaching I would be able to do would have been significantly different than what we did.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I guess like on your diving into those billion pieces of feedback, and having been on the other side from the retail operator, was there anything which you saw which surprised you?
I wouldn't say there's anything that necessarily surprised me. I would say digging into the data, it really just kind of reconfirmed the battle scars that I have, just going through trial and error. But I think the one thing that really has just stuck out to me is even in a big box retailer, there's still that level of engagement that customers want with employees.
Mm,
So even looking at big box where they're trying to drive as much self-service as they possibly can, we still see average transaction values significantly larger when they interact with an employee, even if it's just a simple greeting of, hello, how are you doing today?
mm.
So that element of that human to human connection that when I am greeted or I'm acknowledged, even in a big box, it has a significant impact on your average transaction amount.
People power. You can't underestimate it.
Yeah,
It's that
just a
human
smile,
connection.
right?
Yeah,
Sometimes I feel
yeah.
like I go to the big box and I'm like, there are more just personal shoppers in here that are employed by the big box retailer than there are actual customers. And of course, they're trying to meet their deadlines. I have it calculated right now. I've gone 2 weeks without even getting a hello until I get to like my self checkout. And then I kind of get that, hey, how you doing? And I'm just thinking to myself, well, one, I'm always like, I wonder what their P&L looks like. But two, then I'm just like, do they understand the power of a friendly hello?
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. So for those in the one lasting shot for those in this on the CX side, CX professions who are listening in, what would be your final piece of advice on what to do next?
Yeah, for all the CX practitioners listening, I would, if there's a really good piece that I have written out there where the retail performance layer doesn't replace your voice of customer strategy, it complements it. And so ultimately, if you really think about, you know, who your number one customer is as a CX professional, it really is your operations team because they're the ones who are serving the actual customer on the front line. And so ultimately, when I think about just the success that I've been able to build at Aaron's, it's really always been around my partnership with operations, building trust in the data that we are giving them. And ultimately, that's going to look at how do I give them data outside of just the 5 or 6 pieces of feedback that they might get post-purchase. So I would say that's the number one piece of advice is your front line is your number one customer because they serve the customer. They touch the
Mm,
customer. Hey, how do you build trust with them?
I love that. Zach, thank you so much. You're phenomenal. And I'm so happy you're here
Absolutely.
at TruRating and and helping us get to the next level and CX professionals all over the world. So thank you so much for joining us here today. And to everyone listening, if you're interested in, finding out more, chatting to Zach more on his ideas around retail performance, feel free to hit him or I up anytime on LinkedIn and really love to talk to you about it further. And we'll also be here next month, deep diving into that coaching of the frontline, the teams with another retail guru and expert, which will be launching very soon. So Zach, thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you so much for dialing in and see you all soon.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.